Yo, what's up sa lahat ng aking mga kababayan sa buong mundo at sa lahat po ng mga nasa Pilipinas. Ako po si Mr. Rhiyo. Pasensya na po talaga dahil sobrang busy lang talaga. Pero ngayong Ramadan, magkakaroon po ako ng maraming oras para makagawa ng video. And inshallah matapos ko na rin ang mission ko. At pag natapos ko na ang mission ko, hihintayin ko na lang po kung magkakaroon pa ba ng Mr. Rhiyo Chapter 2. Pero kung wala, okay lang. Tambay-tambay na lang tayo sa FB. So shoutout muna sa lahat ng mga ka-DDS natin sa buong mundo. Hello po sa inyong lahat. So simulan na po natin ang topic natin ngayon. Ayon sa Philippine Information Agency na government website, binisita ni Senator Bam Aquino ang Marawi City noong May 19 para umpisahan ang unang negosyo center sa Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao or ARM, and the specific location is Marawi City. After 4 days na pagbisita niya sa Marawi City, umatake ang teroristang grupo ng Maute na sumanib sa mga basurang teroristang ISIS. Nagkataon nga lang bang nanggaling doon si Bam Aquino? O may koneksyon ng mga pangyayari? May kumakalat din sa social media na ang PNP escorts niya ay hanggang Iligan City lang. Meron daw pumalit na escort from Iligan City to Marawi City. You know what? I smell something fishy sa mga info na nakikita ko. Ewan ko lang kung totoo to pero dahil nanggaling nga siya doon, may punto nga yung info na yun. At talagang sinabay pa nila ang pag-atake sa pagpunta ni President Duterte sa Russia. Halatang halata ang mga galawan nila no? At tingin ko, may koneksyon din ang bantang iniwanan ni Trollane sa interview na to sa mga nangyari sa Marawi at sa mga mangyayari pa.
Ngayon dahil pinagtatakpan, mapupunta na lang tayo sa ibang mga modes kung paano lalabas itong katotohanan na ito. So, sa mga ganong paraan, hindi na nila makokontrol kung ano man ang outcome. Maraming paraan. So, abangan na lang nila.
So, congratulations sa mapangahas na oposisyon na nagplano ng mga katangahan na to dahil pinush nyo si President Duterte na magdeklara ng martial law sa Mindanao. Dapat nga ginawa niya ng buong Pilipinas at ang mapakulong na ang mga basura sa gobyerno. So, ito ang simpleng tanong dyan. Sino ba ang may ayaw na makipagkaibigan tayo sa Russia? Di ba ang mga kano? So kung connected si Bam Aquino sa Maute group na to at connected ang Maute sa ISIS tapos ang ISIS connected sa CIA at ang CIA ay intelligence agency ng Amerika, may kinalaman sila dito dahil ayon sa aking pananaliksik, ang Amerika at ang CIA lang din ang gumawa ng ISIS. Watch this.
It is the most important story in the country. The next major war for the United States is with ISIS. But what media and politicians are not telling you the truth about, where ISIS came from, who created them, and why before one more dollar is spent, one more American life lost, you need to know the truth. The first step toward truth is to be informed. So who exactly is ISIS? And where did they come from?
It's entirely a creation of the United States' behavior in Iraq. That's how we got to where we are, because of war, because of occupation, because of torture.
When the U.S. first went into Iraq, we blew the country apart. We destroyed the government, toppled Saddam Hussein, destroyed infrastructure, and most importantly, left behind a power vacuum, one that would have never have existed had Hussein not been overthrown by the U.S. government. ISIS actually began as a small insurgent group in Iraq in 2006. They had no money, no real ability to recruit, but they did work to create very limited problems for the U.S. military. It wasn't until 2009 that ISIS shifted its focus from Iraq, where it was largely unsuccessful in developing a foothold, and focused on the civil war in Syria. Even there, ISIS struggled to gain any foothold because the two largest groups fighting against President Bashar al-Assad were al-Nusra Front, or Al-Qaeda, and the Free Syrian Army. In June of 2013, a northern general for the Free Syrian Army spoke out on Al Jazeera, Qatar, and stated that if international forces did not send weapons, the rebels attempting to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would lose their war in just 1 month. Well, only months before, I had personally confronted President Obama about why the U.S. was covertly funding those Syrian rebels.
And yet there's some concern about the U.S. funding the Syrian opposition when there are a lot of reports that Al-Qaeda is kind of heading up that opposition. How do you justify the two?
Well, I share that concern, and so what we've done is to say we will provide non-lethal assistance to Syrian opposition leadership that are committed to a political transition, committed to an observance of human rights, we're not going to just dive in and get involved with a civil war that, in fact, involves some elements of people who are genuinely trying to get a better life, but also involve some folks who would, over the long term, do the United States harm.
So even as the president acted as if he was being careful, politicians like Senator John McCain demanded action.
So it's a totally unfair and unbalanced fight. And now the rebels are the freedom fighters, the Syrian National Army are being beaten every place around Syria because of the overwhelming firepower, and air power is really the deciding factor. So you've got to take their air power out of it. You've got to have a safe zone where they can operate, train, and equip. And we've got to turn this thing around.
So what happened? Well, within just a matter of weeks of that Syrian general making his plea for international help, the U.S., Jordan, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel began providing weapons and training and money to the so-called rebel Free Syrian Army. By September of 2013, American media outlets, including CNN and the Washington Post, were reporting that CIA-funded weapons had begun flowing to Syrian rebels. The weapons were not American-made, but funded and organized by the CIA. The artillery was described as light weapons, some anti-tank weapons, and ammunition. But where it all fell apart, weapons that the U.S. insisted would be used by freedom fighters would be in less than 1 year in the hands of ISIS fighters. So where were these fighters coming from? Actually, from the Free Syrian Army, the group that John McCain insisted would help the U.S. to overthrow Assad. That same group actually giving weapons, selling weapons, and sending fighters to join with this new group called the Islamic State. It was in June of 2014 when suddenly, after being a no-name group in Syria, that ISIS emerged, heavily armed and trained by U.S. and coalition special forces, making a dramatic entrance by crossing back over the Syrian border into Iraq, capturing Mosul and much of the northern part of the country. One of the most important facts that mainstream media ignores time and time again is that ISIS was able to grow so fast because of all the U.S. military equipment they were able to seize, equipment that our military left in Iraq, truckloads of Humvees, tanks, and weaponry that instead of taking or destroying, the U.S. government simply decided to leave behind. Even when the U.S. government knew that ISIS fighters were capturing that equipment, for crying out loud, these guys were posting pictures of themselves driving and standing on U.S. military equipment, making video of themselves with it. We did nothing. Well, there are so many questions that we could ask, but let's just cut to the chase here, because what you need to know about this is that ISIS is not the creation of American inaction, which is what the media is going to tell you. No, they are the product of direct action. First, the action of creating the power vacuum in Iraq, and secondly, arming violent jihadists, hoping they would overthrow a leader in a neighboring Middle Eastern country. McAdams says the U.S. government is a victim of its own insane policies.
ISIS is the best funded terrorist group in the world. They make some, I think it's $2 million a day selling oil, much of it to Turkey. Well, I think the U.S. is really a hostage to its own regime change philosophy. The U.S. is very good at blowing things up and destroying societies, but it is very, very bad at putting them back together.
Is that true? Well, you decide. Fact. Our government armed Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and created Al-Qaeda. Fact. Our government helped supply Saddam Hussein chemical weapons for him to use against Iran in 1980 and then overthrew him in 2003. Fact. Our government trained rebel fighters in Syria who would become the group today known as ISIS or the Islamic State.
So ngayon, alam niyo na. So kung Amerika at ang CIA lang din ang lumikha ng ISIS, posible kaya na sila din ang lumikha ng Abu Sayyaf at ng Mauti group na to? At para may mag-aalaga sa mga insekto nila sa Pilipinas, andyan ang mga puppet nila sa Liberal Party. So connected po talaga ang mga pangyayari. So ito ang sagot ko sa mga taga-samba ng Amerika kung bakit wala akong tiwala at kung bakit galit ako sa gobyerno nila. Ba't ko pagkakatiwalaan ang gobyerno ng bansang lumikha ng ISIS, Taliban at Al-Qaeda? At bakit ko pagkakatiwalaan ang bansang sumakop sa bansang pinakamamahal ko mahigit 100 taon na ang nakakaraan? At pumatay ng libu-libong mga kababayan natin na binura nila sa mga fabricated history books na pinabasa nila sa atin? At marami silang binura sa kasaysayan natin. Mapagtakpan lang ang katotohanan sila ang totoong kaaway natin.